getting ready to do an interview with Ray McGovern, and he was a CIA analyst for 27 years. He's been with the government, military, in some degree for over a half a century. And I was curious to see what he might have to say about subjects like 9/11, Snowden, John Anthony Perkins, who wrote the Confessions of a Economic Hitman, different things like this, because mostly he's always asked about Ukraine and Russia, and there's plenty on YouTube about what he has to say about that. So let's hear what he has to say about a few other things, and we also get into the spirituality of what's happening here. Hope you enjoy the interview. Today we're going to be doing an interview with Ray McGovern. Ray, how are you doing today?
Doing fine.
All right, really appreciated your time yesterday, and the lecture was really great, by the way. And
Thanks.
that was really nice of you to come to our community and help wake a few people up. So, I've been watching a lot of your interviews, and they all sort of center around Ukraine, and I would like to take us off the beaten path here for a second, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And occasionally I might find myself in the position of being a devil's advocate, just because I've noticed one of the things on your YouTubes, the biggest thing that comes up, not constantly, but pretty consistent, is that you're biased with the CIA. So I would like to ask you about that. How much biased do you think you are? And is that because people are not recognizing that there's an operative CIA and an analyst CIA?
Well, bias, frankly, is not the word that I would use. What I try to be is informative and to distinguish between the two essential functions of the CIA, which happen to be analysis, which is what President Truman intended, and operations, which President Truman did not intend and said so before he died. Now, why is it important to do that? Because people have very, very great difficulty believing that the essential mission of the CIA was to tell the truth. Sometimes I tell the story of walking into the CIA headquarters, brand new, big marble building, big marble foyer, and on the side of the wall there is the inscription, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." It's carved into the marble there. And I looked at that, and I thought, well, if that's true, this is going to be a good place to work. And you know what? It was.
Yep.
I was able to analyze, I was able to report, and the only thing the editors or my supervisors did, so long as I did good analysis, was correct my spelling errors and fixing the grammar, and chances were that once every month or two, something I wrote would appear on the president's desk. Often enough, it was something at great variance from what the Pentagon was telling him. So it's essential for people to know that there is a CIA, was and is now, I'm happy to say, that has no political agenda, its primary mission of which is to tell the president the truth. And it's equally important for them to know that the operations people are completely hermetically sealed off from the analysis folks. It was another part of the building which we couldn't even get access to. That's how hermetically sealed. And that those folks do their job, so to speak, whether it's kidnapping, torture, or black prisons, under the aegis of the president's different capacity. So the president doesn't expect us to be kidnapping or torturing, nor would we do so. It's really important for people to understand that, and 9 out of 10 people do not understand that.
Yeah, a lot of what most people understand about the CIA is from the movies, and so it's nice to get a little bit of feedback here, because a lot of misconceptions, a lot of disinformation comes from government think tanks. and it gets mixed into the works out here, and people have these conceptions that, quite honestly, I mean, the latest thing on 9/11 was there was like 20 some small nuclear bombs, and that's what brought the building down. All of this disinformation mixes in with the good information, and it just destabilizes people that are really trying to search for the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so,
And some of that is intentional.
Yeah, a lot of it, I think.
I throw out a whole bunch of shrapnel that will confuse the issue.
Yeah, and a lot of this comes, I mean, directly from the fascist playbook. You know, like the false flags. What did they call that building? The Rockstag or something like the building.
They
got burned.
Parliament building.
I mean, so many things parallel what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading a book called The Rise of the Fourth Reich by Jim Mars, and there is a lot of things that lead up to this, like Operation Paperclip. We brought a lot of these people here and installed them in almost every phase of our government, and NASA, von Braun, and all of that. Do you think that is like something to really pay attention to right now?
Well, I think the most important thing is to realize that God is saying to us, be afraid, be afraid, be very, very afraid. Torture, kidnapping, terrorist activity, 9/11 terrorists, be afraid. And that's all very deliberate, because if you're afraid, you sort of are more susceptible to the propaganda, more susceptible to be obedient, like most of the Germans were during the Third Reich. What we need is not to be afraid. What we need to do is realize that we can take power into our hands, because that's what the founders envisaged. They didn't see a government ruling over us. They saw us as sovereign, where we would tell the government what to do. We've come a long way since then, but we still have a system of checks and balances that need to be implemented and not neglected or simply ignored.
Yeah, I totally agree to the fear aspect. I've noticed with a lot of things, if I get rid of the fear aspect, I can really see deeply into a lot of these situations that allows me to plan, actually, to come up with ideas. But if I'm in fear, it kicks into survival and defense, and you don't really learn anything. You can't understand what's going on, which probably is the plan for a lot of these things that are happening right now. So what do you think about 9/11? This is a big one on the radar for the last few years.
Well, I think that was the seminal event of this century so far. No doubt about it, seems to me. The most ironic thing about 9/11 is that the two peer people of the 9/11 Commission, Governor Kane from New Jersey and Lee Hamilton, the Democrat they always trot out as sort of an older statesman and bends with the wind, those two have written a book now. Most people know that. And in that book they say, we were set up to fail. We, the 9/11 commissioners, were set up to fail. They didn't give us enough people. They didn't give us money. They didn't give us enough time. And they didn't give us enough access to classified information. So we were set up to fail. Now, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice to hear 4 years after the investigation, after these pretty books were put out, beautifully edited? So what's the 9/11 Commission report? It's a cover-up. Has to be a cover-up.
So
the
what
commissioners say they were set up to fail.
What do you think they're covering up?
That's a question. So that's the 64 question. Well, it's not clear to me exactly what they're covering up. Now, maybe you have to work in government for several decades before you can understand how royally screwed up the government can be. So, it would sound like Keystone Cops, all the things that were missed and all the things that should have been done correctly and were not. But you can't rule out that possibility that all these things just kind of came together, and it was a disaster from an intelligence and a warning point of view. That doesn't do it for me. There are all kinds of anomalies that cry out for explanation. Okay? Now, I should say right off the bat that I'm an intelligence analyst, right? So when people say to me, now, Ray, come on, don't you believe that Dick Cheney is capable of doing all that? And I say, of course I believe that. I know Dick Cheney enough to believe that. But I don't do faith-based intelligence, okay? It doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what I see. It matters the empirical evidence. Now, Building 7, I mean, the engineers and architects have me persuaded that that was a controlled demolition, pure and simple. Not many people, well, I suppose the standard the cover-up people say, well, no, it was something else, but it looks very much like a controlled demolition to me. And there are all kinds of other anomalies. So in answer to your question, I just have to say that I really get angry when I hear people calling people who are trying to find the answers to these questions conspiracy theorists, because that's intentional. That means to detract attention from people who are doing a lot of good work, trying to find the real answers to these things, and sort of dismisses them before they even come up with the right questions, much less the answers. So my bottom line is an independent investigation is absolutely required, the more so when we can see how 9/11 was exploited in a most cynical way by George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. Look at all the stuff that has happened. So clearly Hamilton and Kane flubbed the dub. I think they should be, for them to tell us 4 years later that they were set up to fail, that just doesn't parse. Now, did the media do anything with that? Oh, no, I just gave polite reviews to the book. And this is what they... Now, there were a couple of things that came out of the book that are interesting, and I'll mention one of them. On page 147, if you go to the 9/11 Commission report, you'll see that they asked the question of why the mastermind of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, why he did what he did. And it comes out in a curious way because the way it happened was the attention of the writers, most of them young staffers writing this report, is that they read in the New York Times, the Washington Post, hey, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has been captured. Oh, wow! Now, we reason that he was the mastermind of this whole thing. So, hey, we're completing this report. Let's ask him why he did it. Hello, good idea. So they go to the CIA. Say, can we ask him why he did it? No, you can't. You can't. We'll do it for you. And so they get a report back through the CIA, and they include that report on page 147 of the 9/11 Commission report. And you have to understand that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has a engineering degree, mechanical engineering, from the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. Okay? Now, I can just see the young people working on this and trying to put it into the reports. I know what it must be. It must be he had a people call him a towel head, in Greensboro. Or maybe he had an affair of the heart, and that's why he. So, but that's not what they hear from the CIA. What they get and what they print in this. See if I can do it from memory. By his own admission, Sheikh Mohammed was not motivated by his experience as a student in North Carolina, but rather by his intense hatred for U.S. policy favoring Israel. Period. End quote. Now, that's very unique to have a statement like that in any official publication in the U.S. government. Nobody hates Israel. those who hate Israel, they just they have a pet peeve or something. Well, this is the real deal. That is what Khalid Sheikh Mohammed told his interrogators. Now you could say, well, is that the only reason? No, it's not the only reason. We had troops in the Saudi Holy Land where the Mecca, where the shrines are, and the Saudis didn't like that either. And bear in mind that I think it was 16 out of the 19 hijackers were Saudis, okay? So what I'm saying here is that there are things in the Land Commission report that are worth looking into because there are little kernels of truth in all this stuff. But the scenario and the quasi-explanations are not persuasive, and now we know why, because they weren't given enough time, enough money, or enough access to inside classified information. Now,
you know what? I don't think they were motivated really to find. I don't think they were really motivated to find the deeper truth to what happened, because I think we all know if the truth ends up being what it's pointing to, that it was an inside job, just bear with me for a second.
Sure.
If it does end up being that is going to unravel the very fabric of the American society's confidence in the government. And I think we all sort of know this. So maybe they weren't really motivated to find the truth, even on a subconscious level.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you set up as your premise that it was an inside job, everything you say, of course, makes great sense. But I'm not convinced it was an inside job. The evidentiary corpus is not persuasive to me one way or another. Lots of reasons to, for example, now if it was an inside job, there would have had to been 50 to 100 or more people involved. Normally, in a situation like that, almost always in a situation like that, 12 years later, 13 years later, you get one of the people involved, he gets tanked up in some bar, and he says to his sweetie, "Hey, sweetie, let me tell you what really went down here." And I was one of the guys that, put the explosives in the house. That hasn't happened. Now, is that conclusive?
Yeah.
Of course, it's not conclusive, but we look for that, and it hasn't happened.
But look at the idea, though, that if for Building 7 to come down, it would have taken at least a week to set that building up to come down, and that would have taken a lot of people. But what you say totally makes sense, and this is the strange thing about looking for the truth. You can grab hold of an idea, a theory, and it makes sense up to a certain point, and then it inevitably collapses on you. So that tells me that with all of the ideas that are going around with the government, what's going on with the military, everything, we're missing a big piece of the puzzle. And it seems to be fitting right in the center of all of these conspiracy ideas and the theories and the projections of what's going to happen. We're missing a big piece of truth. Do you have any idea what that could be?
Sure. It could be one press that you adduced, that it was an inside job. It could be gross incompetence on the part of the government, including the intelligence services. It could be some mixture or something, some hybrid of both of those. But I've looked at it closely. I've talked to all the people and the engineers and architects. I'm a good friend of David Ray Griffin, and I've listened to most of the arguments and the evidence that's adduced, and I just have to tell you that I'm an empirical-based fellow. It's not what I believe to be the case, it's what I can reason to empirically, and my conclusion is that the jury is still out, that an independent investigation needs to happen, and that's about all I can say on it.
Okay, on to another subject. I've been reading a lot about what's going on with the financial climate, and you know about the BRIC nations, right?
Sure.
Okay, so if Brazil, Russia, China, if they're all getting together almost a separate financial monetary system, it seems to me that they're sort of preparing, because we all know that China would love to have the reserve currency, along with several other countries. If the dollar ever loses that position, and if the Federal Reserve ever loses its hold on the printing press, what do you think is going to happen in the long run as the financial thing plays out? Do you think that the United States can stand on its own without being the reserve currency, without being able to present or keep on printing money to establish its balance?
Well, this, of course, is a primary concern in Washington. And one would think that if people are concerned about this, we would not be abusing the privilege of having the currency in its position that it occupies today. We would not, for example, be taking advantage of that to put sanctions on various countries like before, Russia now. So it seems that the people who are running our monetary policy, our fiscal policy, are of a kind that you see at the State Department, where we're the superpower, we're the sole indispensable country of the world, which means, of course, by definition, all other countries are dispensable, and we can hold on to this mostly military might. And meanwhile, do they not know that we're going bankrupt? Do they not know that the countries are about to gang up on us, if that's the right way to say it? Well, this hubris knows no bounds. And so it could be that the people running our policy just think, the ultimate success will always be the dollar as the currency that exists now. And this would be a big problem. Besides all that, there's a very short-term outlook on policymakers. And I often wonder, don't they have grandchildren? I mean, don't the people in Congress have children and grandchildren? Don't they care about whether they have clean air to breathe or enough stuff to buy at the store if there's drought everywhere? Well, apparently, they think they can live in gated communities and maybe put an umbrella over their backyard so that, it boggles the mind. But that's the same sort of mentality. So in answer to your question, this is incredibly important. I'm not sure our policymakers are sufficiently seized with it. I think the smarter ones are aware of it, but it's kind of hard to know what to do when you pretend to be all-powerful.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to predict what's going to happen too, because we touched on it earlier. It's really difficult from a superficial level to tell the difference between a greedy moron or a well-planned, intricate, elite, highly intelligent plan.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the surface, it looks about the same. You have to really dig. And sometimes I go back and forth. Are these people just really moronic and short-minded? Or is there something underneath this? Really?
Yeah. But it may be a combination of each. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But it's a real problem. And, whether we pretend to be the sole indispensable country in the world for many more years, it's going to become more and more pretense and less reality. And take Russia, for example. Now, when I was in Soviet foreign policy toward China, they hated each other with such a passion. This is the 60s now and the 70s, that I was convinced as an analyst that they would always hate each other, that we would always be able to play China and Russia off against one another to our advantage. Now, what happened? Well, over the years, the Russians and the Chinese have made a kind of a pact. And now it seems that NATO is hell-bent and determined to drive Russia into the hands of China. The Russians don't want that. They use their $400 billion deal for the gas to give to China over a period of 10 years as kind of a leverage, but they still want to see their destiny or their future in Europe, okay? So they have two cards to play now, and this card will be put into play, and they do have other places to ship their natural gas. So it's more than just a lever, but if we persist in this policy of sort of ostracizing Russia from Europe, it's inevitably going to be more and more turning to the east, because the Russians can pivot to the east just as easily, actually more easily than can we.
So, Ray, I'm going to get a little bit conspiratorial here. Not
No,
much, though.
get as conspiratorial as you like.
Okay. How much do you think the world banking systems are playing into this? Because it seems like, historically speaking, they've been behind financing the North and the South and the Civil War. All of this stuff comes out over time. And it seems to me that the banking system as we know it, the fiat money system of creating money out of nothing, it's becoming so public right now that I think they're scrambling a little bit, almost in hopefully their last death throes. But if you look underneath a lot of these things that are going on with these countries, the banks that are behind it, it seems like they're still pulling the strings.
Well, sure. And not only the banks, but the corporations, the multinationals. It's a completely new ballgame from what it used to be just 15 years ago, in my view. When you look at what happened in 2008, when the banks were behind all this incredible abuse, and you look at the situation now, hasn't changed much. None of the banks, nobody went to jail. People throughout the world got pulverized into poverty. So the banks are incredibly important, and the corporations go along with them. And now when you get the government, Obama even, who had to sort of bail out the banks but didn't bail out the mortgage, people having mortgages like me, and you get the corporate structure, multinationals, and you put them together with the government, and then you get the media being controlled by the same corporations, the same banks, and then you get the security services that are getting double the amount of money they used to get, and then you get Congress. What's Congress? Well, Congress is siphoning off some of the money from the excesses of these banks and arms dealers and so forth. And so you put it all together, and you get a situation that's very akin to the classic definition of fascism that Mussolini gave. Now people say now, McGovern, don't say fascism, because then people turn you right off, because you can't say fascism without everybody thinking concentration camps, okay? Well, that's they were together, but there's two separate and distinct concepts. Fascism is very real, and if you look at Mussolini and what he said and what he did, and look at the Third Reich, you can see that there are similarities between the people who control the means of production, the people who control the corporate entities worldwide, and the banks, and it's a very, very deleterious situation for the common folks. Question is how long it will take the common folks to realize that and rise up and act as real Democrats, real patriots do.
Yeah, and as Martin Luther King said, there is such a thing as too late.
You got that right.
Yep. And as far as concentration camps, we do have FEMA camps. And it seems like that's a very real prospect on the horizon.
Yeah, there is this very repressive tendency. The FEMA camps are a worry, and I understand that the barbed wire, such as it is not really constructed in such a way as to keep people out of these camps.
Just to keep them in.
Keep them in, my God. Okay. So that was something new I learned on this little trip. But there's more to it. When I look at the National Defense Authorization Act of 3 years ago now, this was when Occupy, the Occupy movement was at its finest, in my view. And I think the powers that be, the ones to which you refer, the people at the top level, the 1%, and the people in Congress were afraid for their lives. I mean, what would happen if instead of 3,000, there were 30,000 people in Washington? What would happen if they surrounded the Capitol buildings or the White House? You know, how would people get home to their cocktails, their martinis at Georgetown? You know, this could be very serious. And so what did they do? Well, in my view, what they did was they said, well, we got protection. The park police will help us. And then somebody said, well, wait a second, the park police has been very sympathetic, actually, to the ones in Washington. They're not going to be much help. There aren't too many of them either. So, oh, well, how about the Capitol Police? Capitol Police, they're good about operating the machines, you know, so you can't bring a bomb in. But otherwise, oh, the district, they'll be fine. I don't know about that. The district police are beginning to realize they're part of the 99%. And, how about the Secret Service? There aren't many of them, and a lot of them are out in Cartagena trying to do things out there with women prior to the visits of presidents. So what are we going to do? Well, the answer came up when they said, how about using the Army? And the response must have been, well, we can't do that. There's a law against it. You know, it's called Posse Comitatus. It was passed after the Civil War to prevent precisely this kind of thing. Ruthless, corrupt sheriffs in the South being able to use the U.S. Army to work their will on blacks and others. So they changed the law. They wrote a new law. And the National Defense Authorization Act allows the U.S. Army to be used in a domestic policing function. Now, why the U.S. Army? Well, look who the U.S. Army is comprised of. It's a volunteer army, right? Forget about it. It's a poverty draft is what it is.
Right.
It's folks mostly who live in small towns, less than 50,000 folks, inner city folks who don't have an equal chance with the rest of us, who don't really have an economic advantage or any real prospect for a good education. So what are they trained to do? Well, they're trained to follow orders and get 3 squares, and if they're sent to Afghanistan, they signed up for it. You know, they volunteered. That's the answer you get from people who don't really care. So if this kind of army is brought into Washington, let's say there are 30,000 people or 300,000 people, the administration fully expects that they will be more apt to discharge these orders and do whatever it takes to repress the crowds, much more so than the district police or the Secret Service or the National Park Service or the Capitol Police, okay? And in my view, that's why they passed that law, reversing, 120, 130 years of history. And what does that mean? Well, that means that somebody come in the back door here, some army guy, and say, well, McGovern, I have orders to pick you up and then put you behind some of that barbed wire or maybe down at Guantanamo. And I don't need a warrant. I don't need anything other than the National Defense Authorization Act. That is fact. And that can happen, and it will all be supposedly legal. Of course, it would violate my rights under the Bill of Rights, but the Bill of Rights don't seem to matter anymore to our legislators or to our executive authorities.
So, yeah, and this is even considering the paramilitary groups that we have working for us now. But there does seem to be a deep rift in our military, and one of the signs of that, I'm getting ready to interview our police chief, and I was going to ask him about this, because have you ever heard of the organization Oath Keepers?
Say it again.
Oath Keepers.
Yes, I think I heard about that a little bit. Yeah,
there's like thousands and thousands of police and military people signing this, and I think there's 10 oaths. But the main one is, when it all goes to hell, which they're expecting it to, if it does, they're not going to do anything against the Constitution of the United States. And they're all banding together. And there's people from every branch of the military, police departments, and everything, because I've talked to some of the police around here, and what they're concerned about is the militarization of their police departments. I mean, they're bringing in some pretty heavy-duty equipment that doesn't match with to protect and to serve.
Hmm. You don't like tanks in the middle of...
Actually, they tend to make me nervous, and I don't see myself standing in front of one with a little bag or anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a natural concomitant to these wars of choice. Now, when we started this preemptive war against Iraq, Colleen Rowley, my colleague and veteran intelligence professionals for Sanity, FBI special agent, also FBI counsel in Minneapolis, she said, look, Mr. Mueller, head of the FBI, she wrote a memo to him, and she said, this kind of preemptive concept, it's undoubtedly going to come back to the law enforcement authorities here, local police, FBI, who until now were regulated by use the least force, lose only the force that's necessary, and never use lethal force unless it's absolutely necessary. Well, what's happened to that? She was absolutely right, of course. You can't separate these concepts, the more so since a lot of the police folks happen to be veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan and other misadventures like that. So it's a serious problem. I'm glad to hear about the Oath Keepers. I hadn't really understood that they were motivated by the Constitution, but that's what we fall back on. And that's the oath I took to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And there are as many domestic enemies of our Constitution now as there are foreign.
Yep. One of the things that sometimes I have this an analogy that we built a civilization like a building, and that building is built on a foundation that's meant for maybe 10 stories, and we're up to like 100 stories right now. And the only way the building can continue to survive is by adding more floors, one after another. And the building is getting weak, creaky. There doesn't seem any way to fix it at a certain point, because we've done the same thing to the civilization. We have a financial system that is totally built on infinite growth. That's the only way it can keep on going, is by infinitely growing. It's deeply connected to consumerism, which is deeply connected to resources, and we live on a planet with finite resources. So we have a system that we're totally addicted to that is totally dependent on infinite growth attached to another system with finite sources. So it seems to me that there may have come a point now where the building needs to collapse because it's a systemic problem. We have built an economy wrongly, and I can't see any way to tweak it or fix it at this point. How do you feel about that?
Well, I share your concern. I'm not an economist or a financial analyst. I suspect there are ways that we can repair the situation. Matter of fact, I know there are ways. There are very good movements out there. One that's going to have major demonstrations with respect to clean air and so forth later this month, actually. I'll miss being in Washington or New York when all this happens. So there are a lot of people who are seized with these realities now. And I do have a lot of faith in the common person in the United States to get together with other people who care about these things, who care about their grandchildren,
Right.
and stick it to the people who are profiteering on this abuse of our resources and who are wasting them and who are endangering our future by the fact that these finite resources are dwindling, and there doesn't seem to be any appetite to stop the greed, to stop the amassment of still more riches by the top 1% in our country.
Yeah, I think of all the things that I've heard you talk about, the thing that really struck me hard last night was doing the right thing for the right reason, irregardless of the outcome.
Hmm.
because we see politicians all the time, and you can tell they're making political decisions, not even based on right and wrong, but even if they do something right, it's a measured kind of a right because they're looking at the outcome. And I think that that's where we're at. We're at a place where we just need to start doing the right thing and see how the chips fall.
Yeah. Well, it's called being faithful, being faithful to your concept of what is right. And it's more than just, some of my major problems come from the silence of people who have some pretense to be moral leaders, okay? Where's the equivalent of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. now? We don't have people like Rabbi Heschel, who was so convicted about the war in Vietnam, and who pointed out to the rest of us that, we're not all guilty of all these evils, but we are responsible.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can't pretend to be a democracy. And so, indifference to evil, he said, is worse than evil itself. And people catch on to that.
Yeah. Where's the outrage? And
it's not
like they say, for bad people to do bad things, all it takes is for good people to do nothing.
Yeah, and that's established. But if people don't know what's going on, and that's where you come in. That's where alternative radio and TV come in. If people don't know what's going on, and all they see is their situation getting worse, and so they have to take yet another job, sometimes 3 jobs, okay? Then when they get, at the end of the day, they put their feet up on the sofa, and they watch the news on Fox TV now, and they think they're getting informed. So what I see is that there's a real premium on alternative media like yourself, putting out the word on these things so people can be educated to the point where they say, well, that's not right. That's not right. And I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to get together with a small group. We'll figure out something to do. It's not going to change the world, but it could change something in our immediate locality. It could prevent police abuse. It could give minorities a fairer shake and have them welcomed in our community rather than targeted. And so you work on it little by little. And, we never thought we'd get rid of the Vietnam War, but we did, And it's really up to us if we want to pretend to be democracy here, to exercise our rights and not to be afraid. Maybe that's the biggest thing, not to be afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the biggest thing that you read in religious texts, fear not.
That's right.
Once you're in fear, you're easily manipulated.
Yeah.
Because whoever's putting you in fear also has the relief valve and just keeps you playing on there. So this gets into another aspect. I'd like to get your perception of this. A while back, I wrote a book on beliefs, and it's about belief systems in particular, whether it's Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Republicans, Democrats. I interviewed several neuroscientists on this, and they're all coming to the conclusion, based upon brain mapping and doing MRI, functional MRIs, somebody that has a really rigid belief system. Now I'm talking about a belief not based on fact. I'm talking about it's based upon a thought, and the thought is, I'm going to pretend like I know something that I don't. And eventually people forget that they started out not really knowing, they were pretending, but now they really think they know. They get really isolated with that belief, and any information that comes in, they even subconsciously or consciously, they no longer see the concept or hear the words. Actually, I'm talking neurologically.
Mm-hmm.
So consequently, they become what we've called narrow tunnel vision. And they actually do have tunnel vision. Their peripheral vision even starts breaking down as their mind contracts. Then it goes into entropy, and the brain actually shrinks. So what I'm thinking is, maybe as this plays out and neurology plays and science plays a bigger role in our lives, we can start seeing that it might not be a good thing to pretend like we know things we don't and then build huge religious organizations around it that are in conflict with other religious organizations that have done the same thing except with a different belief. Do you think there's going to come a time when religious people will finally just wake up and go, you know what, I don't know, and be able to look at other religions, and we could all get into this together and start exploring the truth in a more open fashion instead of like our great grandfathers did, that has never worked out in the history of the planet?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what you were talking about a minute ago is what a layman would call denial. Okay, you have this kind of set of beliefs that you grew up with, and then fear kicks in because something dents your belief in this or dents your belief in that, and the tendency is to deny these other influences and just go straight. And it's interesting you're talking about tunnel vision, because I can see it getting narrower and narrower as you get older and older. I would separate, I don't think religion is necessarily a part of that, although it's related. I think that when you get the kind of narrow tunnel religion, like some people have, for example, people who say, well, the Bible says this, or the Bible says that. The Bible says that the Jews should have the whole promised land, and then when they do, then Jesus is going to come again, and we'll go right up there. And sorry about the Jews, but they're going to be left behind. But they, it's really nice. Thanks for Well, that's to my way of thinking, tunnel vision. It's actually not what I share as a belief system. But there are other belief systems. We call them faith systems because they're not. Because you have to believe them. You can't empirically show them. But, I'm thinking of one of my favorite novelists. His name is Kurt Vonnegut, okay? And he's a atheist, agnostic. He's a humanist, I guess they call him. And somebody asked him one time, well, what do you think of Jesus? And he said, well, I don't know if he was the Son of God or not, but I do know that if it weren't for the Sermon on the Mount, I'd just as soon be a cockroach.
Right. Yeah, that is a beautiful part of the Bible, I have to admit.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's the real Jesus for me. But, as my pastor has said many times, your Jesus might be my Jesus' enemy. Because if you construe him in what did Jesus say about homosexuality? Oh, that's clear.
Right.
Zippo, okay? Somebody said, well, why do you advocate women priests, McGovern? Jesus didn't ordain any women. And I said, you're right. Jesus didn't ordain any men either. But when you get some knowledge about biblical scholarship, then there's some hope for you. But if you remain in this tunnel vision, then you just clash with people and you ostracize people, whether it's gays, lesbians, or whatever. You have some sort of quasi justification for calling them the other. And that can play out on the international scene as well. When you ostracize people because they don't look like us, because they're not part of the indispensable country in the world, they're dispensable by definition. They don't look like, we can call them towel heads, we can call them sand jockeys, we can call them gooks or slopes, and that's much easier to kill them, much easier to do what's necessary to protect what we really want, and that's the oil, the natural gas, or whatever we want in terms of strategic improved situation. So, yeah, this is insidious stuff, but we have to, distinguish between the crazies, is what I call them, and the people who think these things through and abide by a belief system. I quoted Rabbi Heschel. He's one of the best of the Hebrew scholars, the Hebrew rabbis that I know. There are all kinds of incredible exemplars, whether it's Jewish, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Christian. There are people from the faith traditions who really have their head screwed on right, if I can put it that way. And I listen to them and I learn from them. And they are the antithesis of what you're describing here as the tunnel vision, very afraid, denial people.
Yeah, and I think we have to differentiate too between the Zionists, the KKK, ISIS. They don't really represent the three major religions. You know, they've sort of hijacked it.
Mhm. They don't, but by the same token, and take ISIS or ISIL or Al Qaeda or whatever. Now, we would be given to believe by our government these guys hate us. They hate us for our freedom. They hate us for our democracy. They're hardwired to hate us. When they were born in the hospitals in Baghdad, they come out, already hate us just because we're good Americans, right? Well, how ridiculous. They don't hate us for our democracy. They hate us for what we do. And what we do in supporting the incredible dictators out there in Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and all those, pomp and circumstance oil monarchs is an abuse of the citizens that they rule over. What we do in terms of identifying with the state of Israel under its Likud government, where they can, kill 2,000, 3,000 people in Gaza, civilians, and our media simply say, well, yeah, fair and balanced, but there were 34 or 45 Israelis who were also killed, So what we need to do is, just kind of do a perspective on all this stuff and realize that, as I have said in the past, I use an analogy to defeating malaria. With malaria, you find the mosquitoes and you trace them back to the swamp where they breed. And then you set up 3 platoons of Marine sharpshooters and you try to shoot them all dead while they leave the swamp, right? Wrong. What do? You drain the swamp. Okay, now, how about terrorists? Those terrorists breed. Right. They breed in a swamp of grievances. And many of those grievances are legit, okay? Legitimate grievances. And many of those grievances are due to our policies. So if you want to stop terrorists, if you're really serious about it, you start draining that swamp of grievances, and then you won't have ever-increasing lines in front of Al-Qaeda or ISIL recruiting stations.
So what do you think about John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
God, that's devastating, isn't it? Oh, God. Yeah, he's the real deal, Yeah. Up to him, and that's a very, very instructive book. I wish that every American could have a chance to read it.
Yeah, it was pretty revealing. So, I'm going to let you ask the last question.
Sure.
And the situation is this. If you were by yourself or with your friends and you're thinking, oh my God, I hope he doesn't ask me this. What is like the one question that you really don't want people to ask you about? Go ahead and think about it. I mean, what would it be that really you'd rather not touch on?
This is going to sound funny to you, but for me, there aren't any such questions. What I'm in the business of is spreading truth around, and to the degree people want to filter truth from my personal experiences, it's an open book.
Well, I think this interview has sort of proven that, because we've touched on a lot of different things, and you haven't hesitated on any of them.
Well, I don't satisfy people. For instance, on 9/11, people say, well, come on, Ray, you can look at all this stuff. And I do look at it. I look at it very seriously. And then I have to say what I did before. I just, as an intelligence analyst, I need a little more than, asking me whether I don't believe that Cheney is capable of that. So, yeah, I guess what I'd say is that I'm glad that you mentioned the thought that we need to just step out. Now, I would say step out in faith. Maybe people would not relate to that, but you have to step out in the belief that you can make a difference, okay?
Yep.
Now I'm here for 2 weeks. I just came from Russia and West Europe for 2 weeks. And I really would like to be with my grandchildren and my wife, you know. I have 9 grandchildren, and I'd like to be,
Well,
but I have certain responsibilities, and by virtue of what I learned when I worked in government and what I could see happening to our intelligence agencies and so forth, to the degree people will listen to me, and I'm delighted to be invited to places like Chico, I feel a certain, what's the word? Well, a certain responsibility to draw from those experiences, and as long as I'm able to do that, that's what I'm going to do. So I really would ask you, I would just ask you to understand that all the questions are okay for me, and I'll answer them honestly, and whether people like that or not, you know, I hope they like it, but if not, you know, people in Washington don't like a lot of what I say, that's for sure.
well, I think a lot of the things that you talk about are really important. I'm not too sure if they're going to lead to a remedy without a higher consciousness. It seems like Einstein said, we're never going to find the solutions to the problems from the same level that created the problems.
Right.
You know, we're all looking, and for me, I look at things as the problems, but underneath it, I think it's a spiritual problem, a problem that we've alienated ourselves. We've lost connection with the planet, each other. And I think with a higher state of consciousness, it's people like you that are keeping things in balance until we can get there. But I think the ultimate remedy will be a higher state of consciousness.
I think you're right about that. Even though I operate on the realpolitik, you know, for example, when you mentioned Einstein, well, what you say is exactly right, but the dictum that I focus on is much more simplistic, and that is, I think he also, if you keep on doing exactly the same thing and expect different results, well, you know, that's the definition of insanity. Why do I mention that? That's what we're just about to do with respect to re-entering Iraq, re-entering Syria, and causing a wider war again. You think that people would be conscious enough to say, been there, done that, didn't work, you know, let's try something else. So
Yep.
let's hope that people can at least understand that much.
And being conscious enough is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many times in my life, your life, we've looked back and go, oh, if I was only thinking, if I'd only been a little more conscious, I wouldn't have said that, I wouldn't have done that, I would have done it different. We just have to wake up and become more conscious.
I agree.
Well, you know what? I'm going to let you go for now. I'd like to leave you with this. After your lecture last night, I was thinking, why do I feel I have a tremendous amount of respect for you? And I was thinking, back in the Vietnam days, I was in college. So I was disillusioned early. You know, I was taking criminal science. I was going to go into the police department, the military. But then I started getting these photographs back about what's happening. And then I joined the Students for a Democratic Society, the Black Panthers, and carrying my sign, hell no, I won't go. So right from the beginning, I was really young when I was disillusioned.
Mm-hmm.
But with you, you were in this system for so long, and to have the courage to speak out so many years later, my hat's off to you. You know, I wish more people could do this.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, you have a good time here in Chico, and it's a beautiful town. Get them to take you downtown and walk you around sometime.
I've been doing that.
Yeah.
It's great time.
All right, Ray. If you need anything while you're here, feel free to call.
I need ice cream.
Uh-oh. We have one of the best ice cream places in town, and Bob knows where it is.
I'll be there.